Oh yeah! 5-star Aloy. Everyone's favorite collaboration character that everyone wants and has no complaints about whatsoever. I've been playing her quite a bit since her first release. Here's my personal in-depth-ish guide of Aloy, the Genshin character. I'll avoid some of the really detailed comparisons and outliers to avoid confusingness. What is an Aloy? Aloy has a cryo damage kit that encourages use of cryo-imbued normal attacks. In a very basic sense with the kit design, she is the cryo version of Yoimiya. In practice though, I wouldn't recommend using Aloy in this way. She's unreliable in imbuing cryo to her normal attacks and doesn't even get close to Yoimiya in damage per second. Let's go through an overview of her combat talents. I have her talents at level 6 because I've been busy crowning A. MiHoYo decided to be a jerk to both new and old players by having her use Inazuma weekly boss materials rather than one of the Mondstadt weekly boss materials? Anyway, her plunge, aimed, charged, and normal attacks are fairly normal. Nothing special to state for now. Aloy's elemental burst, Prophecies of Dawn, is a burst cryo damage attack in a large circle to the side. It can hit multiple enemies at a time. Aloy's elemental skill, Frozen Wilds, is a bit complicated as her uniqueness of a Genshin character is centered around this skill as it has conditions to infuse cryo damage to her normal attacks in a buff called Rushing Ice. Frozen Wilds is a close to medium range skill where a blue baseball is thrown by Aloy at an enemy. Upon impact with an enemy or obstacle, the blue baseball explodes doing cryo splash damage and then releases 6 chill water bomblets around the explosion. If an enemy was damaged by the blue baseball, Aloy will gain a coil stack. Each chill water bomblet is like a mini mine. When touched by an enemy, the chill water bomblet does cryo damage and provides Aloy a coil stack as well. The number of coil stacks is shown on Aloy's character for a brief moment. Each coil stack will increase Aloy's normal attack damage. If Aloy gets 4 coil stacks, she then receives the Rushing Ice buff. All her coil stacks are consumed and she does not gain any coil stacks while the Rushing Ice buff is active. The Rushing Ice buff increases normal attack damage and infuses cryo to the normal attacks for 10 seconds, just like Yoimiya's Pyro Infusion activation. Rushing Ice buff will be shown by the ice aura around the characters. Nobody cares about the meager enemy attack percent reduction the skill gives. Regardless of the enemy's reduced damage, you'll still feel the interruptions and knockback that shields protect you from. If it was 50% or higher for the attack percent reduction, then I'll be interested at that time. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of her combat talents. First, her burst. At talent 6 with a non-whale gear setup, Aloy's burst can comfortably do to a group of enemies 45 to 70k damage with a melt crit, or 15 to 30k crit without melt. Her burst costs 40 energy with a 12-second cooldown. The animation/iframe time is 1.5 seconds. For the cost, cooldown, and size of the damage area, Aloy's burst does a respectable amount of damage. However, the biggest flaw with her burst is that you don't have complete control over where she will shoot the burst if there are enemies all around. Also, the damage area is off to the side, while many times the enemy will be either right on top or coming towards the player. This means that it can miss if the enemy is on the other side of the player, or if the enemy steps outside of the circle during the animation cast time. Or the auto-aim of the burst will shoot towards the wrong area so that a good chunk of the enemies won't receive damage. Because her burst can't be counted on to hit consistently, the lack of extra effects is heavily noticed. The closest burst I can compare it to is Amber's. Because of Aloy's burst's inconsistency, many other characters make for better support, DPS, sub-DPS, whatever-ish PS. Now let's dive into her overcomplicated elemental skill. Aloy does not need to be on the field to gain coil stacks. When switching back to Aloy, the number of coil stacks will be displayed. She also maintains cryo imbuement from Rushing Ice when switching out and back in, just like Diluc keeps pyro imbuement. However, her 10-second starts and continues as soon as 4 coil stacks are obtained, whether she is on or off the field. In most cases, the blue baseball and the mini-mines do not need to do actual damage in order to grant a coil stack. This means hitting shields or immunes will still grant coil stacks. As long as combat is ongoing, Aloy will not lose her coil stacks and normal damage increase buff until she gets the 4th coil stack to activate Rushing Ice. This means she can indefinitely have up to 3 coil stacks as long as combat is ongoing. If she is out of combat for over 30 seconds, then she will lose her coil stacks and with it the normal damage increase effects. Wildlife cannot provide coil stacks. The elemental skill provides a good chunk of energy upon the initial damage. The mini-mines do not provide additional energy. As there is a 20-second cooldown, Aloy does not make for a good long-term battery compared to other options like Diona or even Eula. Mini-mines have the same physical interactions and restrictions that Gubua, Gobua, Godbua, and Bunny Baron have. You can move them around with certain moves like Sucrose's combat talents, and they will always fall to the ground. You can use someone like Sucrose, Kazuha, and Venti to gather both enemies and Chillwater bomblets together, or to gather the enemies all together first and then let Aloy throw her bomb in the midst of it all. Either way works depending on what your combo is. With Sucrose, I personally like starting off with her burst, then using Bennett or Zanyan to add Pyro to Sucrose's burst, and then spam all the cryo from Aloy at the enemies hopelessly caught in Sucrose's burst. I don't use Aloy in this way, but this is what I like doing if I do want to use her in this way. I'll pause there for a moment too. That was also confusing for me to say. Anyway, there's different combinations to go with when having Aloy as a main damage dealer. Aloy's cryo imbuement is really bad for dealing melt damage. Her first attack in the string of normal attacks has its damage multiplier split between 2 shots. This means her melt damage would be half of what another character's melt damage would be on a first strike. Yoimiya also has the same issue, but Yoimiya's normal attack multiplier is higher. Also, Yoimiya gets a 5th high damage attack in her combo that procs a reaction, while Aloy gets only up to a 4th attack that does not proc a reaction. In her normal string of attacks, Aloy's reactions will occur on the 1st and 3rd attack, so she misses out on a 5th high damage attack to make the juiciest melt reaction. In theory, this skill does a lot of cryo damage when the 6 bomblets are included, and should make Aloy into a lean, mean, fighting, normal attacking machine. I want to rewrite that, but I won't. Not counting group damage abilities, Aloy's elemental skill damage potential is 16% higher than her elemental burst damage. However, all the bomblets can't be counted on to damage the enemy, and that's if her skill even hits an enemy. If you don't use her skill at point blank range, you risk the chance of it completely missing from hitting a target. Aloy throws the blue baseball like a celebrity does for the opening pitch of a baseball game. If you are wanting to use her cryo-imbued normal attacks, then you'll have to hope and pray that Aloy doesn't yeet her elemental skill out of battle, that her elemental skill hits, and that the enemy activates 3 of the 6 bomblets. Her skill has a lengthy 20-second cooldown, so if that blue ball misses, then there will be an agonizing period of time that follows. Even if the skill does not hit an enemy, you can get the cryo imbuement still if the enemy activates 4 of the 6 mini-mines. May your RNG be strong. When running with some sort of crowd control to drag the bomblets and or enemies together, you run into the issue that the cryo imbuement may not activate due to the bomblets being activated within 0.1 seconds of each other. One of the small detailed text for Aloy's skill is that gaining coil stacks is on a 0.1 second cooldown. So if all the bomblets touch the enemy within 0.1 seconds, you will only end up with 2 coil stacks at most. One from hitting the enemy, assuming the skill did hit the enemy, and one from the 6 bomblets being used up within a 0.1 second window of time. While waiting for her cryo imbuement, Aloy is stuck with doing pitiful physical damage numbers. You can switch out to someone else as well, but one of the issues with that is not having Aloy on the field for the full duration of her cryo normal attacks. Also, unlike other characters that have cooldowns associated with elemental imbuement on activation of a skill or burst, you can't use the cooldown timer on Aloy's skill to watch for a specific number of when the elemental imbuement buff will run out. This means you either have to be very good at timing it on the fly, or you waste time trying to figure out when the RNG starts for the cryo imbuement and ends. This means wasted DPS time from knowing when it starts exactly and ends exactly. You may end up incorrectly timing skill and burst combinations because of this. At the very least, you'll probably end up having Aloy out doing her much weaker physical damage normal attacks, which that time could have been used for dealing damage with another character's much higher damage move. Because of all these factors, it is difficult but not impossible to run Aloy as a cryo normal damage DPS that matches to other free-to-play DPS options. So in short, Aloy has a good value elemental burst for the damage it deals versus the low energy and low cooldown time. However, the damage can be unreliable by auto-targeting the wrong way like Guaba. Also in short, Aloy has an elemental skill that has very unreliable damage and unguaranteed skill activations, especially if the skill isn't used at point blank range. It has nice energy generation, but it isn't worth it when compared to the long cooldown. Passive talents. Easy Does It is one of my favorite open world skills. It makes it so that it takes more time to startle an animal that wasn't affected by Sayu's passive. This allows you to gaze at the magnificence of the animal before they flee in absolute terror of the murderous traveler monster you raised. If you combine Aloy with Sayu, you can befriend all of the wildlife or you can terrorize them all, you monster. You can also finally run up to those big birds and hit them with a melee character. And poor Timmy. He and his pigeons deserve it though. Strong Strike. Strong Strike increases Aloy's cryo damage bonus 3.5% every second for the duration of Rushing Ice, which is 10 seconds, 35% by the 10-second mark. Basically, you won't really be able to take advantage of the 35% damage. A simpler way to think of this talent is that it makes the Rushing Ice buff also provide an approximate 20% cryo damage bonus as well. For Combat Override, when Aloy receives a coil stack, she receives a 10-second buff where her attack is increased by 16%. Other members in the party have their attack increased by 8% instead. If she gains another coil stack before the 10 seconds are over, it will refresh the timer to 10 seconds again. As she needs to gain coil stacks to receive the attack percent buff, this means when Rushing Ice is active, she will not be able to have the attack percent buff refreshed since Rushing Ice disables gaining coil stacks. The 8% extra attack is a small consolation prize for switching out to other characters while waiting for Aloy's Rushing Ice effect to activate. For Constellations, Aloy doesn't have any. None at this time. Please, MiHoYo, I want Aloy Constellations. Gosh dang it. Please. Blocks. Please. Roles. How does Aloy fit in the different type of roles? For Cryo Archer main TPS, Ganyu is the undisputed queen. Aloy is but a humble DPS peasant in comparison, and she is comparable to Diona. Diona's shield is reliable in hitting the enemy, and her burst is more reliable than Aloy's. Even if burst doesn't hit the enemy, it is still useful for healing. The shield and heal allows Diona to focus more on damaging the enemies. Between Diona and Aloy, I'd say to use Diona for safe and boring reliability, and Aloy for a wild card of a DPS.
Guys, why aren't the brakes working?
Because I cut the brakes! Wild card!
The fact that I can compare Diona and Aloy's DPS outputs and be uncertain which is better, while Diona's kit is purely support, is an issue on Aloy as a DPS character. They need to fix her reliability. Cryo Applicator. For applying cryo, all the other cryo characters, including Chi-Chi, are more reliable than Aloy to apply cryo on demand. All other cryo characters other than Chi-Chi will reapply cryo in shorter windows of time. Support and sub DPS. For pure support, Aloy provides a laughable 8% attack buff and an enemy attack debuff, if the skill manages to hit the enemy, and even then, the weak buff lasts only half of the time of the skill's cooldown. For sub DPS, Aloy has potential high quick swap damage, but other sub DPS and support are much more reliable in their damage and typically provide much better continual support for the main DPS to do more damage. Cryo Battery. As a cryo battery, essentially every other cryo character is better than Aloy due to how unreliable her skill can be combined with the length of her cooldown. Without consideration of weapons and artifacts, Aloy's best role is as a quick swap sub DPS that always has her burst available to use. So her normal attacks will essentially never be used. She'll just come out to burst skill and then swap to the person that needs energy. Or you can have her use her skill first to buff her burst with a 16% increased attack. For sub DPS, a 4-piece Noble Obligation set is great. It provides the 20% extra burst damage, but more importantly allows Aloy to provide a constant 20% attack buff. Combined with her passive 8% attack buff from hitting an enemy with her skill, this provides the other members of the party a total of a 28% attack buff. Not too shabby. If you want maximum elemental burst damage, then use 2-piece Noblesse Oblige and 2-piece Blizzard Strayer, 2-piece Gladiators and Shimina Ramen's Reminiscence with a 2-piece Blizzard Strayer set is another good second option to this as well. If you are a masochist or die-hard Aloy fan that still wants to go with a main DPS build, then use a 4-piece Shiminawa's Reminiscence or 4-piece Blizzard Strayer. Both are great options in their own right. Shinramen's Remis would be better if you have a lot of crit. Blizzard Strayer is better if you don't have enough crit. Whichever set or role you decide to place Aloy in, the recommended types of artifacts are DPS. DPS or Aloy is defined as 1. Top priority, crit rate and crit damage, then 2. Attack percent, 3. Elemental mastery, 4. Energy recharge, and 5. Flat attack. As far as the artifacts with variable main stats, go for an attack percent sand, a cryo damage goblet, and a crit rate or crit damage headgear. Now on to a big topic. Weapons. I'm not considering 5-star weapons as a typical player like moi ain't a whale. The obvious choice for Aloy as a sub DPS is to use stringless. For a 3-star weapon, Raven Bow would be your best bet. For those stubborn enough to keep trying to make Aloy into a main DPS, then Hamayumi, 4-star craftable, or Slingshot, 3-star, would do well. Basically use Yoimiya weapons. Approximating. If your Hamayumi is below Refine level 4, you can use it if you have enough crit. Otherwise, Slingshot is better if you don't have enough crit. Once Hamayumi is rank 4 or 5, it would be better to pick that over the Slingshot in most cases. The weapon of choice that I recommend though is Sacrificial Bow.
This looks useful.
With Sacrificial Bow, she becomes an S-tier cryo battery while maintaining flexibility of high swap damage and being able to reliably activate the Rushing Ice buff. But more than that, having 2 blue balls at a time is a lot more fun than 1, despite what others might say.
This thing is fun!
Sacrificial Bow. If you're lucky enough to have a Sacrificial Bow, and even luckier to have it with multiple refinement levels, then there are a few things to note if you use the Sacrificial Bow, as it has some quirks. One of the big reasons for using Sacrificial Bow is that each bomblet has a chance of activating the bow's ability to reset the skill. This makes it very rare for the Sacrificial Bow not to reset the skill when it hits the target area, as one of the bomblets is very likely to reset the cooldown. However, unlike obtaining coils, the bow's passive does not proc when Aloy is off-field. Aloy has to be on the field in order for her skill cooldown to reset. Also, in order to have the bow's ability activate, damage has to be dealt to the enemy from the skill. So if only the enemy's shield is taking damage, or the enemy is immune to cryo, then the ability will not activate, unlike coil, where damage does not need to be done to gain coil. So when should you use Aloy? Well, if you want an additional sub DPS with high burst damage, yeah, she's pretty good for that. If you want a ridiculous burst amount of cryo energy when you use a Sacrificial Bow, she is awesome for that. If you want to abuse her passive ability to befriend or lay waste to all animals in Teyvat, she's great. She's the best. Or if you just like her, just like how people out there use Amber as their main DPS because they just like her, yeah, why not? No one's stopping you. That's pretty good. More power to you. So I use Aloy a lot just because I like her, and it's a great bonus of having Sayu roll over animals with assistance from Aloy's passive. Also, Sacrificial Bow makes her pretty fun to use as well by releasing 2 blue balls at a time.
This thing is fun!
What are your impressions about Aloy, the Genshin characters so far? Comment below. I'm interested in seeing what you think about her. I have a lot of opinions, but that's outside the scope of this video. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful for you. Oh, yeah? Yeah. Alright. Awkward. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.
I never had parents, but a man named Rost raised me. He was stern, but kind and generous. And he trained me well. I miss him.